What's going on, team? Welcome to another episode of the Master Your Craft Study. If you hear a little bit of wind in the background, I apologize. While I record this introduction, I'm actually out in Los Angeles. I've had a really great opportunity to come out here and meet a couple NBA players and some phenomenal trainers, and I've bumped into some really cool people along the way as well. So more on that in the future. Real quick, our fan shout out of the week goes to Tom Tankowitz. He sent me a message on Facebook, actually. He said that a buddy of his introduced him to the podcast and had some very nice words to say. He said, I absolutely love it. Keep up the great work. Tom, I am not quite sure if you can call this great work just yet, but I'm headed that direction and I'm going to continue to improve. So I appreciate the kind words, and to you as a coach at UNC Greensboro, I got a chance to watch you guys play against my Mercer Bears in the SoCon tournament, and you have a heck of a squad. So Tom, you keep up the great work, and I'm looking forward to checking out the team again this year. Thank you so much for the shout out. For anybody else listening, check out our social media accounts at the MYC Study, or go to the website if you want to subscribe to our blog and to get notifications every time a podcast episode comes out. That's the MYCstudy.com. But for right now, I want to introduce our guest. This week, it's Mike Lee. When I first heard of Mike, it was when I was a middle school and high school basketball player up in Wisconsin. Mike was regarded as one of the best basketball trainers in the state, and I still remember watching some of his training videos when I was in my early stages of basketball development. Now Mike, who actually lives out here near LA, and I'm going to be meeting with him here in the next couple days, works with people to help them unlock their greatest potential in their personal and professional lives. He's founded 2 companies, one of which is called Mindshift Labs, where he works with organizations, brands, and leaders. And the other was Train Thrive 3, which works with middle school through NBA level basketball players. And the unique approach, Mike's secret sauce that he uses in all of his training and all of his coaching, all of his speaking, is the power of mindfulness. And I know that that's a topic that a lot of athletes and coaches are still unfamiliar with, but there are teams that are starting to pay attention to it. You see a lot of teams, especially in the upper echelon of college basketball, high major, mid-major schools, and then especially in the NBA, there's a lot of sports psychologists, and a lot of people in the sporting world are realizing the power of mind and the different mental struggles, for example, that athletes and coaches are facing. So it's good to have those resources, and Mike is someone who has been on this train for quite some time and has dealt with some of those issues himself, as have I. And so it's really cool to hear his perspective and to see what he's been doing in his work. This is a slightly unorthodox interview in the sense that we talk about all different things mindfulness-wise, and not just basketball in particular, but you will get that perspective since Mike got his start and made his name in the basketball world. For me personally, mindfulness is something that I believe is an unbelievably powerful tool that is just waiting to be tapped into for a lot of different people. This was an insightful interview for me, and I think it will be for you too. All right, without further delay, please enjoy my conversation with Mike Lee. Mike, welcome to the Master Your Craft Study. Thanks for coming on, man.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
So obviously your background has been as a basketball trainer for some time, and you've done tremendously well in that field. Tell the people what you've been up to recently. Let's say the last few years and some of your new mindfulness ventures. That's really exciting. I think that's a pretty cool take on life in general, but obviously athletically specific. I think that's really cool. Tell people about your mindfulness practices and coaching and speaking.
Well, the short story is I've battled depression my entire life. I was on an antidepressant medication for 14 years. When I moved out to Southern California, I decided to go off of the medication. And because I would get super depressed in the winters, living in Milwaukee and Wisconsin, growing up there my entire life. And so when I moved out here, obviously it's like sunny in the summer, and you're not dealing with season affected disorder. And so I decided to go off the medication, and getting off the medication was like getting off of heroin. It was crazy. Some of the withdrawal symptoms and things that I went through, getting off of it, and to be honest with you, still experiencing today. But the only way that I really was able to successfully move through that phase was I committed to a daily meditation, daily mindfulness meditation, and yoga practice. I did a crap ton of yoga over the past few years. I mean, sometimes taking 2 classes a day and meditating because I couldn't get present. The medication I was on, when you get off of it, like obviously you're dependent on it, you're addicted to it, and it like completely changes your brain chemistry. So when I got off of it, my anxiety was like through the roof. And that was something that I never dealt with really before. I mean, obviously like pregame jitters and things like that, playing and coaching, but nothing like this at all. And I just couldn't be present. So the only way that I was able to really get off this medication was to pick up a mindfulness practice, which helps you settle your thoughts and be able to just kind of bring yourself back to the present moment.
What medication
For those
were
of
you on?
you, it's called Effexor, the SSRI.
Is that a common one? I dare say, I mean, we have a lot of people when I look at the age demographic of the watchers of this, or excuse me, the listeners of this show. A good chunk are 18 to 24, which would imply probably high school and college players, but probably about 60% are older than that. And a vast majority of adults are taking similar medications. Was that a pretty common one?
Well, it was for a while, but like the FDA put like a black box warning on it now, and it's like not being prescribed hardly as much.
Probably rightfully
which is
so.
great because I mean, it was part of the reason I decided to get off of it was causing birth defects in children whose mothers were taking this while they were pregnant. And some of these kids are like being born without arms, without legs, and like crazy stuff like that because of this medication. And I just like, if this is happening to these kids, like, what is this doing to my body long term? And I decided to get off of it. But yeah, I mean, I don't know. I mean, medication in general, like 70% of our country is on medication, which is insane. And then something like 20 to around 20%, 20 to 30% are on some sort of antidepressant, anti-anxiety medication, which is insane to me when you like really look at the numbers and how many people are actually on these medications. And that's just the people that are taking it, not counting the people that are dealing with these issues, especially athletes that are being untreated and aren't even being talked about.
Well, that's definitely how we can kind of bring some of this together. So your background is in basketball, it's in athletics. You're a high school athlete, a college athlete, and I think it's something that is probably just now coming to surface as an important or beyond important topic, but universities are starting to spend money on it. So for example, I know the head trainer, he was my trainer when I was at Mercer, but he's now the head trainer at North Carolina State. And he talks frequently about how mental health is essentially their number one issue or their number one quote unquote injury that athletes will go through. And so they've hired psychologists, multiple of them, that they have coming in and out of the training room. Well, why do you think that it's taken so long for that to get noticed when athletics is something that's been high stakes and mentally taxing for as long as we can remember?
I mean, I think there's a couple things. I think as a society, we live in a world of what I call constant distraction, partial attention, and like constant comparison. We're constantly being bombarded with social media messages and advertising messages telling us that we need to do more, be more, and then that we're not good enough. We need to buy more and we need to do more in order to achieve more, in order to feel good about ourselves. And that's only going to get worse. I think that's part of it. I think another part of it is that, mental health is it's an invisible, I hate using the word illness because I don't think it's an illness at all. I think it's not something that can be, when I think of an illness, I think of something that needs to be treated like traditional, like medical practices and things like that. Whether it's,
you think illness,
we're going down a whole different road, but
yeah. Well, you think illness, you think medication or Band-Aid, right? Like that's what you think when you think illness rather than change.
Yeah. Or like you have the flu, or you have a cold, or you have, somewhere along those lines, something like that. I just don't categorize it as something that's an illness. I think it is something that is highly, highly misunderstood, even by the medical community. I think doctors don't know crap about, can I swear on here? Doctors don't know anything. I shouldn't say anything, but they really don't understand the realities of mental health. They just don't. Um, I think the challenge is that mental health, you can't truly talk about mental health without also talking about spiritual practice. You can't. They cannot be separated. Because at the bottom, like, I don't know who said, I think it was a psychologist, Carl Jung. He said any psychological problem after the age of 40 is always rooted in a spiritual disconnect or something like that. I can't remember exactly what he said. But the bottom line is like, you can't, and that's the problem. Like, back in the early 1900s and before that, before like really medicine really came into play, people used to go to the church. They used to go to their pastor or to their priest or their rabbi or they used to go there to when they were in a state of not discouragement, but a state of despair, right? That's where they used to go. And and this is like totally going down like a different road, but
That's okay.
My experience growing up, in a Catholic tradition is that like a lot of these churches have failed us in a huge way, and we're just super disconnected.
But now we don't have that support.
Exactly, and that's the thing. So there's a reason that like the numbers in attendance of churches across the country, specifically like in the Christian sector, have dropped tremendously over the past 20 years or so. But my whole point with that is, whether you agree with that or not, or whatever your experience has been, it's not who's right or wrong. Like, that's like the truth, that the numbers have like significantly dropped. And so where do people go? They go to they'll go to psychologists, or they will go to a psychiatrist, and they don't bring in that aspect of it. So they're you have a psychologist or psychiatrist trying to treat a condition with something. You're trying to treat a condition without approaching it with any sort of spiritual aspect to it.
And it's far less reaching. I mean, so many more people would go to the church and feel that sense of community and support than would go to a psychologist. I mean, that's a pretty specific. I never even thought about going to a psychologist when I was younger, and I probably could have used it. But I did get, in some ways, I was raised Catholic as well. I went to a Catholic school through 8th grade, and there were negative aspects of it. And that's one of the reasons that I struggle with my faith at this point. However, there were plenty of positives, and one of them was the support system of the leaders in the church community, because a lot of them are really good people that were looking after your well-being. Well, you eliminate that, and it can be intimidating to think about seeking out a psychologist. And there are entire groups of people that are of the Christian faith that are no longer a part of it, who have not sought out psychologists.
Yeah, I don't really know anything about that as far as like where to deal with these issues. But going back to what we were talking about, like it needs to be bridged. Like, there needs to be whatever your practice is. Like, it doesn't matter as long as you have something that you feel deeply connected to, whether that is Catholicism or being Hindu or Muslim or spiritual and practicing a crap ton of yoga or whatever it is. Like, whatever you're connected to, and then being able to bring in there's so many different practices, whether it's CBD or whether it is, cognitive behavioral therapy, or whether it's a mindfulness practice, or whether it's EMDR, or any of these other practices can all be combined with a spiritual practice. And I think when you only tackle it from one angle, that's where you fall short. I mean, it's not easy. I mean, like we are like at the very, very beginning stages of like understanding it. And I think going back to what you asked about before, about like why it's taken so long for athletes and coaches and universities to be able to approach this issue, is that it can be an invisible state that you are in. Obviously, like some people, like I for example, did a really good job of hiding it. Like, I mean, I tried to act in ways that were incongruent with how I felt at the time. And so it can be something that you can hide, that you can play off, that and quite frankly, like that you just don't understand. Like sometimes you don't know how bad you feel until you get out of that state and you're back into your quote unquote like normal state or normal self, that you don't realize how bad things get without a high level of self-awareness.
Yeah, absolutely. I wonder if it's something that with the increased level of awareness that we'll start to see more resources coming available. Like I said, North Carolina State hiring a psychologist. Do you think there will be a time when different athletic departments decide to start hiring psychologists or coaches that might come in with that in mind? Could that ever be something that is widely accepted in the sporting world?
Having like a mental practitioner on staff or a spiritual practitioner?
Either one. I mean, obviously they serve a
Yeah.
different purpose, but both equally as helpful in the
Yeah.
general mental health realm.
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I think for sure, 100%. I mean, the more we're starting to understand about the mind and the more that's been like proven over the past 15 years because of advances in technology, they're able to actually like scientifically prove that meditation works. That's meditation, it's not some thing that was derived from Buddhism or Hinduism. Like, it like physically changes your brain. It increases the size of like your neocortex, and like it shrinks your amygdala, which basically like your your amygdala is like responsible for your fight or flight response. So it's literally shrinking that part of your brain to calm it down, which is why I don't think that people change when they go through meditation practice. I think they just have a lot more self-awareness, and they're in responsive mode versus reactive mode. So it's not so much about, changing who you are. It's more so about increasing skills that are going to be beneficial for you. But going back to what you're saying, like, do I think that we will see a time when like this is, when every college program in the country has a mental health coach or a mental training coach, something like that, where it's, equivalent strength conditioning? 100%. I mean, the way I look at it is back in and they're going to do it for multiple reasons. It's not going to be just about mental health, but I think, you look at back in like the late 80s, nobody lifted weights. Everybody thought that Jordan and Karl Malone and these guys were crazy, that they were lifting weights. It's going to mess up their shot. It's going to make them bulky. That lifting was only for, football players and Olympic lifters. And they got an advantage. They got a huge, huge advantage for several years before other guys really started to take training their body, just like they were working on, their jumper or their, ball handling skills. They got an advantage. They got a huge advantage. And I think that's where training your mind will be in 10 years, maybe less. Because the guys who really want to get an edge, like where else, you can only like put in so much time. You can only get up so many shots. You can only spend so much time in the weight room. So what else are you going to do to get an edge? And I think, training your mind, and that could go on a whole other conversation, is, will 100% be there. But tying it back to the mental health aspect, you're never going to be able to replace the infinite value that you contain or your self-worth by a basketball performance. It will always be fleeting. So when when your performance can be rooted in the fact that you are not defining your self-worth by your performance, is when the other skills that you can work on, like a meditation practice or mindfulness practice or visualization, or these different tools and skills that you can use, will be able to reach their potential. Otherwise, you're always going to be battling an uphill fight.
Absolutely. It's going to be difficult. I'm curious to see how that goes. I'm curious to see what sort of programs really truly adopt that first. But that's something that you're doing right now, right? I mean, that's something that certain teams have right now. It looks more, the format is more of a come in and speak to the group rather than be hired by a specific university to work full time. But that's some of what you're doing now, right? I mean, you're going to different businesses and athletic departments and coaches and teams and speaking about some of this.
Yeah, and I mean, schools, I am, and schools are also hiring. I mean, there's some, I know Creighton, like a kid that I worked with for several years, played at Creighton, and he used to go and speak with like their sports psychologists. Like, I think he used to go see him like once a week. And he was just available for him. So there's definitely opportunities and options at bigger schools. The way I look at it is this: if your personal life is all messed up, like it's going to have a significant impact on your professional life or your basketball performance. If your basketball performance is not going well, your team's not doing well, it's probably going to have an impact on your personal life, right? So being able to balance those two things, and like I think a sports psychologist's job really is just as much about dealing with the issues that are going on in your personal life in order to clear your mind so that you can actually just focus on what you're supposed to be doing on the court. I think that's like a huge piece of it. You look at the the best coaches that we've ever seen across any sports, and I shouldn't say any sports because I'll be the first to admit, like, I pretty much am only a basketball guy. I don't pay attention to hardly any other sports. But sticking to basketball, you look at the coaches that have succeeded. Yeah, they understand X's and O's, but so does everybody else. Like the coaches that win, the coaches that succeed are the guys who develop relationships. And, that's just a huge part of it. You look at what Steve Kerr has done. You look at like Phil Jackson, or you look at the programs where guys are always going back in the summer to, guys that make the league or playing overseas, or if they're coming back to your program, you develop those relationships. Like that is, you can't just do it by X's and O's. And I think that's just a huge mistake that a lot of, people make across all industries. Like it's not just about the technical skills, it's about the emotional skills and the relationships that you build. It's super cliche, but it's super true. Obviously that's why it's cliche, but people always say, I don't know how, or I don't care how much you know until I know how much you care. I'm sure you've heard that a million times, right? So, you can't challenge kids to be better, to do more, to put more time in, to reach their potential unless you first connect with them on a personal level and they know that you really care about them. I mean, it's when you get on the same page there on a personal level and a relationship level, like the rest of it's easy.
Yeah, absolutely.
Basketball is a simple game,
Yeah. Obviously, if some of the best, like Steve Kerr now, or if we look back historically, John Wooden is someone who's a very mindful coach, and he's probably the best of all time. If coaches are so mindful and it's equating to a lot of success, what is it that you can say, or what kind of advice would you give to different coaches now that they can use to build relationships with their players, if we know that that's so important?
Well, I'm going to kind of answer this in a probably unexpected way, but I actually think if you want to, the number one thing, if I was like, obviously I'm not coaching anymore, but if I was coaching, the number one thing that I would do is I would make every single kid on my team take the 5 love languages test. And are you familiar with this at all?
No, explain it to me.
Okay. So the 5 love languages is a kind of a system that was written by a guy named, I think, Gary Chapman to help. He's a marriage counselor, and he started noticing all these trends that people would be coming in and like, they wouldn't, they're obviously like they're coming in, their marriages aren't going well. I'm like doing an awful job explaining this, but like, people would be coming in, their marriages won't be going well, and he's trying to like help these people out. And he finally discovered like that, and basically what he discovered was that people feel and understand love in 5 different ways. And everybody's different. Like, so what happens is like when we're growing up, we are conditioned to show love in a certain way based on how our parents loved us. And so we then go out into the world, and in the relationships that we're in, we love other people the same way that our parents showed us that. So there's different ways that basically languages that people learn how to love, and some of these get complicated depending on like the household that you grew up in. But some people, like for me, something that makes me feel loved is acts of service. if somebody does something for me that, like, if I'm a friend of mine, or a significant other, if I'm dating somebody, if they do acts of service for me, that acts of service that help support me in some way, shape, or form in chasing a dream or working on a project or something like that, that means way, 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 way more to me than somebody telling me I love you, right? But for somebody else, they might feel more loved by words of affirmation, or words of basically compliments, or words affirming the connection, or words affirming the love that they have for somebody. So so going back to the coaching, if I was a coach, I'd make every single player take this test. And I don't know exactly what all of them are. Like, one of them's quality time. The other one is like words of affirmation. The other one's acts of service. Another one is physical touch. And another one is, I don't remember what the fifth one is.
Receiving gifts.
Yeah. Did you just look it up?
Yeah. Words of affirmation, quality time, receiving gifts, acts of service, and physical touch.
Yep.
Interesting.
Okay. So what I would do is I'd make every single kid that I'm coaching take this test. And then I would be hyper aware of the way that they know and receive love, and try to communicate in those ways. I mean, I can't imagine the impact that this would have for a coach. Like, you look at, and this is kind of getting into some like metaphysical stuff, but like, you look at back in like 2004, 2005, and like 05, 06, when I can't remember who it did. Some kid who was like a student manager at one of the California state schools, he tracked Steve Nash for the entire season. And, I'm talking about the touches.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So like, when you have awareness of it and you really think about it, like, there is like definitely something that happens, like when you have physical touch with somebody, whether, it's basketball, it's like high five, or like, I always say, like, one of the most powerful things that you can do as a coach is to put your arm around a kid. It just, little things like that go so far.
Yeah, for people that are listening that don't know what we're talking about, Steve Nash, and I'm not familiar with the person who did this study or who paid attention and quantified this, but Steve Nash in some ways became infamous for being the guy who was actually intentionally trying to create physical contact with his teammates constantly, i.e. high fives, butt slaps, arm around people, grabbing people, hugging people in the huddle, things like that. And it added up to, it equated to some tremendously high number. And that was right around the same time that he was the MVP of the NBA. I mean, you look at the guy and you wouldn't think that. And then if that's one of the things that's important to him, it has to mean something.
It was insane. It was like 175 a game or something like that. Like, and that even might be low. It might have been higher than that. But it was at least like 175 a game. Like, it was crazy. I've had kids do this at like a camp and be like, for the next hour, like, see how many touches you can get. And like in an hour, and I'm thinking these kids are like, wow, these kids are like super active, and they're really trying to do this and see how many they can get. And after an hour, I asked the kids, like, how many touches do you get? And the kid would be like, 50. And I'm thinking, Nash is getting 175 in a game. That just like blew my mind. Mm-hmm. But going back to like what we were talking about, like that, there is a transfer of energy and a trust that is built when you create physical touch. So that's, going back to the 5 love languages, that's something like, if that's like high on a kid's list, like, then do it. And the other thing that I should say about the 5 love languages is like, everybody has some of these at some level, right? So like, even if acts of or gifts are like the number one thing, the second thing might be quality time. So maybe you can't buy the kid a new pair of shoes, but you can take them out to get some plant-based ice cream after practice.
You're funny. Yeah, I coached for a short while, but those sort of things are tremendously impactful. And I guess I never really conducted myself on the 5 love languages, but as coaches, we all have our calling cards, right? And for me, I was the personality guy. I thought it was really important that you personally engage, you make eye contact, and you seek a very high level of empathy with all of your players, because you can't get to a point where they trust in what you're trying to tell them to do for the good of the team or not. They won't trust you if you don't understand who they are as people and how they're best coached. And I think that's tremendously impactful. And coaches need to stop sometimes and realize, not that they don't, but a lot of coaches don't do that. A lot of coaches are so caught up in, we say X's and O's, but there's a lot of other things that goes into it. I mean, you think about the time commitment that recruiting is between reaching out to different services and trying to send and receive messages and calls constantly. And then you add in season booking travel and hotels and all these things. And sometimes you forget that the most impactful time you can spend is in the personal relationship with your current team. That's a development
Right.
mindset that a lot of coaches kind of get lost in because of everything else that goes into it, all the other hats you have to wear.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah, it's not easy. It's not, I mean, it takes time. It's time. You know, you're a high school coach, like you're getting paid like 5 cents an hour to do this. Like you're not, you know, that's the hardest thing. And it's, you know, I can't imagine being a high school coach and being a high school coach, having to teach, having my own family, and then having to like develop personal relationships with all these kids on my team. I mean, that's like, it's a lot. Like it's a lot. But you know, we're not talking about like what's easy here. We're talking about what, you know,
It's
if you want to
effective.
build a powerhouse, like these are the things that like are super important to do.
Yeah, absolutely.
You know, going along with that, like you're talking about, you know, at the high school level, like I know this is kind of unrelated, but you're talking about the coaches and like all the different things that they have to do. A big thing that great coaches do is they let go and they delegate. You know, you don't need to be booking hotel rooms. You don't need to be, you know, you need to be doing the things that you absolutely need to be doing where you are making the most impact. So many coaches want to control every single little thing that goes on. And the bottom line is, it's like, if somebody else did that 80% of the way that you're doing it, you're still going to be better off because you're spending your time in your highest, with your highest priorities. Being able to have the awareness around that is, I think, is huge.
Absolutely. Well, Mike, let's shift gears just slightly. But what I'd like to talk about is you went through some of this mental or mindful transformation. You identified that, you know, I need to do something here. But this could have an impact on people who are current players or on coaches right now in their personal lives. Let's talk about your routine. You know, I read your book, and there's a lot of different things in there that a coach or athlete could use to essentially become a better player or really just improve their life in general. And the first thing we'll talk about amongst a list of several things I have here is not repressing your thoughts and emotions, but engaging in them.
So I guess real quick, we'll go morning routine. I mean, my days are significantly better when I'm in routine. Like it's just not even close. With all the travel, like it's really hard to do it when you know, your flight gets in at 1 o'clock in the morning and you have to run a camp at 9 the next day. And it's, you know, you got a 3 hour drive after you land at the airport. But my days are significantly better when I have morning routine. And usually what it is, let's just say in an ideal state, it's workout, either yoga, run, soul cycle, cryotherapy, meditation. And the cryotherapy, I know this is getting like a lot, I think a lot more people are going to start having access to this. I know like some NBA teams like have these chambers like in their training facilities. And it's great for decreasing inflammation, but it's also amazing for your mind. Like this is something that Tony Robbins does every morning. He either does cold plunge or cryotherapy. And it's, you know, yeah, it's for inflammation. Like obviously inflammation is like a huge part of recovery in athletics, but it also like, it puts your body into a state of fight or flight and will release certain hormones in your body that increase things like dopamine, which impact your ability to be present and your ability to focus. So it's workout, cryo, meditation, and then visualization. So I do like a 15 to 20 minute mindfulness-based meditation practice. And then the next anywhere between 5 and 10 minutes is visualization practice. And I visualize what I want to show up in my health, what I want to show up financially, and what I want to show up like in my personal life and relationships. So it's health, wealth, and relationships. And a big thing, one of the things that I'm learning about visualization is like, you can't, your heart and we have alpha waves and theta waves, all these different waves that represent the state of our mind. And we also can do that with our heartbeat. And when we visualize, we have to align both of those. If they're in contradiction, the visualization doesn't work. They have to both be aligned. And so when we visualize, you need to visualize in a state, not like, oh, I hope this happens, more so a state as if you were grateful for it already happening and thanking, whatever you connect with for this showing up in your life. I mean, I won't go into the details, but the more I've done that from that perspective, versus I'm visualizing something that I hope happens, I'm visualizing as if it has already happened, and in a state of gratitude for it already happening. That has been a game changer. So, workout, cryo, meditation, visualization. If I do those 4 things in the morning, my days are like, they're good. If I was a player right now, I don't think, obviously some of those things are already built into your schedule. I think if you can if you can make or schedule or prioritize 10 minutes to meditate and 3 to 4 minutes to visualize in the mornings to start your day, change everything. I mean,
so you think you could do it
I try
in
to
15
use
minutes? You think a player could effectively have a mindful practice that takes 15 minutes that would change their day in their life?
I think they can have a practice in 10 minutes. The bottom line is you can practice mindfulness. You can practice being more aware of your thoughts, feelings, and actions in the present moment without having a meditation practice. But your mindfulness practice is significantly amplified when you have a meditation practice, because the meditation practice is creating a higher level of self-awareness to be aware of those things.
Right. And the more that you do some of the meditating or personal mindful practices, probably the stronger that your constant state of mindfulness works, which is probably, I jumped the gun a little bit when I mentioned it, but that's one of those essentially lifestyle approaches. Like I said, not repressing your thoughts and emotions, but engaging them. So that would probably be something that becomes a habit over time. And when you face some adversity, how it is that you respond or approach that becomes a lifestyle thing. So what else is there? Say, you're meditating every morning and really trying to incorporate mindfulness in your life. What can that do for you? And some of the things that I have written down here from your book that come to mind, and speak on a couple of these: vulnerability and compassion. Why are those important?
Vulnerability is how you connect to people, right? I think, we live in a world where we're trying to be perfect all the time. And when we don't allow ourselves to be vulnerable, it's hard to connect to people. Like we connect to other people through shared celebration and things that we accomplish together. But the reality of it is that most of us connect through pain. And you look at why did the whole country come together when 9/11 happened? Because we're all in a state, we're sharing the same pain, and people were able to connect in that way. So I'm a super open book, and I'm trying to share as much as I possibly can about what's going on in my life, because I think selfishly, the more that I share, the more I understand myself, but also I think the more that I share, the more I give permission to other people to do the same. And that's what helps you move through some of these states that you're in or situations that you're in. But the vulnerability piece, we can't, again, you can't connect to other people without being vulnerable. And I think as a player listening to this, being vulnerable around your coaches is huge. Now when I say vulnerable, I guess what I don't want it to be confused with is you have a right to complain.
Right.
There's a difference between being, when things aren't going well, and being able to objectively identify and to open up about things. And there's a difference, and going out complaining about it and playing a victim. And that, when I say vulnerability, I don't mean playing the victim role. And I just want to make sure that that's super, super clear.
Definitely errs more on the side of identifying your own flaws and being open to changing them on that end of the spectrum, rather than the other end, which would sound more like complaining, whining, or almost making everyone else worried about your problems for the sake of a selfish ego. But yeah, being vulnerable is difficult these days, especially with social media. I mean, it's difficult because we feel like we're constantly having to put forth an image that is likable, right? If someone sees you not smiling, not happy, or you're not successful, or you're not the richest, or if you're a basketball player, you're not getting a certain award, or you're not getting recruited. My 3 short years of coaching, I mean, I've gone through it all the time. I've seen kids lie to all of their friends and teammates about different recruiting and offers that they have. And I looked at myself why?
Yeah.
Why is it that they have this complex that they need to somehow meet a standard when really the truth is inside? And any little achievement you have is going to be personalized for you. You don't need to represent something that you're not. That's pretty common. That's worse now than it's ever been. Is that social media? Is that what it's causing?
I think social media amplifies that, but I don't think it's a cause. The cause is our need for approval and seeking our value through our external accomplishments. At the end of the day, like when you really, really, really break it down, at the end of the day, what we really just want is peace. We want peace of mind. You know, we don't want a college scholarship because we want a college scholarship. We don't want a new car. We don't want a new coaching job because of those things. We want them because of the way that they make us feel. And at the end of the day, like those things are always fleeting, right? You have to want those things for the journey involved in them, not the end result in and of itself. I'm not saying that obviously like we shouldn't chase things, we shouldn't build businesses, we shouldn't try to get college scholarships, but we can't define our self-worth by those. We have to, you know, fall in love with the process of being the best that we can while we chase those, and fall in love with the process of who we become as we chase those things. Because at the end of the day, like the thing that matters the most is the growth that you have as a human being as you go through all these things, all these things, getting a scholarship or building a program, all these things. At the end of the day, the bottom line is like, it's about your personal growth. That's where you actually feel the fulfillment. You don't feel the fulfillment from winning a state championship. You feel the fulfillment from being connected to a group of people that you shared a common passion with, and like sacrificed and went to practice with and rode the bus with and got up early in the summers with. And like that shared connection on the way to that championship is what actually matters the most. What was your original question? I kind of went off on a tangent there.
No, you're good. Talking about lifestyles or habits that come about through your mindful practice. I mentioned vulnerability and compassion.
Oh yeah. And I mean, the compassion piece, I mean, compassion is not about being weak. Like compassion is about like, it's easy to be tough and to not express how you feel and to not, be compassionate towards somebody else. It's super difficult to be compassionate all the time and be vulnerable all the time.
Yeah.
Have to find that balance.
Let's go down that path a little bit more about things coaches can do for athletes or in the development of athletes. Matter of fact, one of the last guests we had on the show, it's the most recent episode currently while this is being recorded, but it was with Jason Aker, who was an assistant coach at Mercer, where I was at for a brief period of time. And then he just got the head coaching job at Oklahoma Baptist. And one of the things that he talked about is a huge proponent of the way he's going to approach his team now that he's the head coach, is he wants to identify in truth and honesty, which I know you're big on, what is, and it's probably not success, but what is it that you truly want? So if a coach can identify, okay, with each player, what is it that you truly want and how can I help you accomplish that? I would say that that's a sense of awareness as a tool to help set up your decisions. How important do you think that is, that coaches take a very personal or honest approach with their athletes?
I think it's awesome. I mean, I think that's great what he's doing. Basketball as a tool to prepare them for the rest of their lives. So like if some kid wants, some kid says, hey, I want to build my own, or I want to be a CEO, right? Or I want to build my own business, right? And that's what he really wants. Now he's got that as leverage to hold the kid accountable for being a leader in practice. And he can always if you can tie it back to the bigger picture, you're always going to have leverage. Right.
Or he talked about, for example, like a lot of players will say, well, I want to help the team win, but being able to sit down.
Yeah, but that's not the real answer.
What he alluded to and even said was, well, he likes to sit down and then discuss. Well, it's a little more complicated than that, because if what you're saying is true, right, we're going to speak in honesty and truth here. You helping the team win means these three things are what you need to focus on. And most players don't.
Yeah, exactly.
They don't want to hear the contribution that's actually going to take. So that's it's a good thing to get out of the way early, but you're right. There's like a standard you can set with that once you know, and the truth might be, okay, you don't necessarily just want to win. What you want is you want a little bit of shine. You want to be able to tell people you were all conference, or you want to get your numbers up. So hopefully you can sign a small contract in Europe or something. You don't necessarily want that. But establishing that honesty and that truth from the beginning can be really impactful in building a relationship, especially with someone who's going to have a shared vision with you.
Yeah, I 100% agree. No, I think it's a great idea what he's doing.
Yeah, absolutely. Tell me, Mike, and this is a little bit different of an interview that I've had with some of the other players and current coaches that I work with, but I still want to keep a few themes the same. Tell me your
Yeah,
thoughts of whether it be a story and or an example or a definition. Tell me what you think and what comes to mind when I say the word grit.
I guess I don't have honestly, I think it's kind of like super overused and cliche. I mean, I know Angela Duckworth wrote that book about it. I mean, at the end of the day, like a lot of it's just about like persistence and perseverance. I mean, I think they're the same thing, unless like, I don't know if how everybody else has defined it. But that's when I look at it, that's what I look at is like, are you consistently persisting through adversity with a great attitude, with an attitude of, how am I going to learn? How am I going to get better? How am I going to grow today? Not why is this happening to me? Being able to approach it like with that attitude, I think it's necessary, and it always has been necessary for anybody to do anything, achieve any level of greatness. I think that the thing that gets missed is that coaches want their players to work harder, but the bottom line is people do value work. People will work for something that they actually want to achieve. I think the problem is not that kids don't work hard, or that, we're as coaches, we're, trying to get players to work hard. I think that the real challenge is that the goal or the dream is not defined. The vision is not defined. When that is defined, the work becomes a lot easier. I think a lot of people, kids aren't going to work hard for the sake of working hard. What are we working for? What's the vision? What am I trying to bring to life? That's when, you're able to tap into things like persistence and being able to go through adversity and grit. But unless you have that vision, like it's going to be an uphill battle every single day trying to get kids to work hard for the sake of working hard.
So grit is more the byproduct of a vision that you will passionately fight for, in your opinion. It's almost like you see
I
it.
would say, yeah. I mean, what's that?
So yeah, it's almost like you see it and identify it after the work has been done or the mindset has been set. I mean, once someone's determined that they've got a worthwhile cause or the team vision, whatever the case may be, they're willing to fight for it. Well, then you look and they act with grit. Grit almost just defines the process.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah. I mean, I agree. I mean, you look at, there obviously is a component of it where, kids maybe they want something and they say that they want something, but they just don't know how to work yet. But then it goes back to what we were talking about earlier. And it goes back to the relationships, right? You can't get a kid to work hard unless you have a relationship with them.
Right.
And you're not going to get them to work hard unless you have painted a vision with that kid.
Yeah, you have to be honest with them and then raise that standard and hold them there. I ask everyone because it's one of those things that I'm more interested in everyone's take on it, because I actually have a similar sentiment, right? Like I love the word grit. I mean, who doesn't want to be considered a gritty person, right? It doesn't necessarily mean any one thing, but it fascinates me because a lot of people like to define it, right? But then it's always like, okay, well, how do you coach that? Like if you're a coach,
Right.
you're like, okay, well, you're telling me what it is. Like, right, like you see Tyler Hansborough get on the floor 3 plays in a row for loose balls and gets every one of them. He's bleeding from his face. It's like, oh, those were gritty plays. But like, okay, well, how do you coach that? How do you teach that to somebody? And that gets to be a really difficult conversation. And most people have pretty surface level answers, which is okay, because everyone's got their take on it. But I've always been fascinated by, the process by which you get there. So Mike, in your book, and we don't have to go into too much detail, but I will say for any athlete or coach or someone who's invested in trying to improve their daily process or their achievement or their output based on a mindfulness practice, you should check out Mike's book, and I'll link to it in the show notes and post some things about it. But in the book, Mike, you talked about your 5 greatest influences. So I want to take that and use it in the sense of, or have you comment on it with tangible results here. I'm going to put you on the spot. So whether it be people, authors, social media accounts, specific books, music, podcasts, anything like that. If you could suggest three
Mine?
or four, besides your own book, if you could
No,
suggest,
no, no. I mean, no. I mean my own influences.
yeah, if you want to give some of your own,
Okay.
that'd be great. Or if you have good
Holy cow.
suggestions
Okay.
for different players and coaches, if you have some good suggestions that people listening might be able to put into their five, what might they be?
So let's start out with what you read. I guess, what you read really, I feel like, is dependent on what you need, right? So, in all honesty, a lot of stuff that I've been reading over the past couple of years has been a lot of like mindfulness, spirituality, books based around those practices. So as far as like relevance to basketball, I'm sure a lot of guys out there have already read it, but Chop Wood, Carry Water by Joshua Medcalf. As far as, reading, I mean, everybody's like consuming stuff in different ways now. There's just so many ways to consume content, whatever you need.
What about, say, YouTubers or different trainers or different coaches, or even just someone on Twitter or Facebook or anything like that? If you're going to have a social media account, you might as well use it as a tool. Who would you have in your life as an influencer if you were a basketball player or coach right now?
Well, honestly, the one thing that I really feel like I tried to do is to follow people outside of basketball and then being able to bring these practices into the basketball world and make them super, super practical and applicable. Well, let's back it up kind of what we were talking about before with John Wooden. I think anybody who's starting out coaching should read John Wooden. I read a bunch of his books when I first started, and he influenced a lot of philosophy. I don't have a specific title offhand, but
A lifetime
what's
of
that?
a lifetime of observation and reflections on and off the court is a really good one to start. I've actually got it sitting on my windowsill. For any young coach listening, that's a phenomenal book to start with because it's not very dense and it's sectioned off, and it's essentially some of John Wooden's journaling, and he touches on a lot of his
Okay.
philosophy, which is tremendously important, or
Yeah.
impactful, I should say. And that would be a really good one to start with.
Yeah. So we can leave it at that. John Wooden stuff would be great for anybody starting out.
Yeah, absolutely.
So read, watch. I think to keep it simple, like watch the game, right? Like if you're a high school or college player, like how many NBA games are you watching a week? Like you should be watching or study film, right? If you're in college and you got somebody that can break down film for you, it blows my mind how many colleges do not break down their film or NBA film. It's like, it is crazy to me. It's crazy because, science has proven that like what we watch and what we visualize, our brains can't tell the difference. A great thing going back to watching is watch your own highlight tapes. I mean, I think people might see this as like a egotistical thing to do. But honestly, like when you watch your own highlight tapes, your brain is visualizing you doing these things out on the floor, right? When you practice, you're going to have error. You're going to miss shots. You're going to dribble ball off your foot. You're going to, you're going to make mistakes, right? But when you visualize, everything is done perfect. So you're getting like perfect reps every time. I think you can get to a certain level where honestly, like playing the game, once you have a foundational skill level, you can literally watch another player do something in a game, an NBA guy do something in a game, and be able to go out on the floor and like actually do it. So I think, what players watch, you watch game film, watch film. I mean, study the game as if you were a coach, not watching it because you want to see, LeBron's top 10 dunks in 2018, right? How does Chris Paul come off pick and roll? What does, how do these players move without the basketball? What does, how does Steph Curry change his speeds? All these things like can apply to you and to your game. So what you watch, I think that's huge.
Awesome. I'm going to put you on the spot one more time for our last question. And this is another one that's recurring that everyone has to answer. The topic is give the waking message to everyone in the country, meaning they wake up and the first voice they hear is yours. What advice would you give?
Well, I think this kind of goes back to, you read what you need, right? You need to have something that you are so connected to from the inside, not from what I tell you, not from what you hear your high school coach tell you, not from what you hear Alan Stein tell you. You need to have something that is deeply connected to something inside of you that you want. And that's what you need to be thinking about first thing in the morning. It's not, whenever you try to get motivation externally, it never lasts, right? it's got to be something that means something to you. And I would turn that back and say, I'm not going to tell you what you should
find your own waking
be
thought.
be your own guru, right?
Yeah.
You don't need somebody else to do that for you. And spend time in thought, journal, think about it. What do you actually want? And then think about that when you first get up in the morning.
Cool. Yeah, I love it, man. I love a little bit different approach. That's an excellent way of being able to look at this. We've got all these different voices. That's the purpose of this show. We've got people of all different walks of life, and we've got people with all different opinions and all different ways of which they've come about their own success. And the culmination of all of those stories is bound to reach all different audiences. So I can definitely appreciate that. And that's something that's really valuable. All right, Mike. Well, that's all we got time for now. I mean, I know this is such a complex topic of conversation when we get into mindfulness and how that can play a role in your life and things like mental health and whatnot. For those of you listening, go ahead and definitely check out Mike's book. The subtitle is Redefine Your Success Through Mindfulness in Sports, Business, and Life. And the title of it is Untrained. So you should definitely go check that out. There's a lot of really quality information in there and could help you get on track if you're not, or just help you amplify your life as it is. Mike, anything else you want to say before we get out of here?
Don't define your self-worth by your accomplishments.
Oh, see, that's your waking thought.
Yeah, but that's not going to get you out of bed. You know what I mean? Like you need something that's going to pull you out of bed. Don't define your self-worth. Don't allow your external accomplishments to impact your self-worth and how you feel about yourself. I mean, we haven't even talked about this, but all the things that, kid used to play at UCLA just took his life a few days ago. Some of the players that are coming out and talking more about their challenges with mental health. And at the end of the day, a lot of these challenges really come from the fact that we're defining how we feel about ourselves by our performance. And it's a hard road to walk. Like when you are so passionate about something, it's hard to, I read this quote the other day. It's like, how do you separate the art from the artist? It's like, I think that's very true with basketball. How do you separate the person from the player? And especially when you're super passionate about the game and you put a lot of time in, and you have to know that deep down you have infinite value, and that something put a beating heart in you to put you on this earth, and that alone is enough. And you don't need to do more, you don't need to be more, you don't need to achieve more in order to have that infinite value.
The level of meaning that people could find in your work could definitely do a number on a pretty large majority of our population. So I'm looking forward to where you're headed. Where can people find more of you, Mike? What are your social accounts or websites? Where can they find more Mike Lee?
Basketball stuff is trainthrive3.com. Mindfulness and speaking is mindshiftlabs.com. Also on Instagram, who is Mike Lee, and all our social channels for basketball training are Train Thrive 3.
Awesome. I'll link to all that stuff in the notes and the blog post for the show. Well, Mike, I appreciate you taking the time, man. I know you're busy and been traveling a lot, and you're always looking for someone's life that you can impact and better serve. So I do appreciate you taking the time to come on the show.
You bet, man. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, man. We'll talk to you. Team, don't go anywhere just yet. Give me 1 second. This will be brief. Number one, thank you so much for tuning in to another episode. It means the world to me that you're taking the time out of your day and you see value in our show. So I'm going to continue to improve and continue to bring you good guests that are inspiring and that are willing to share their stories with you so that you can learn from them. Second thing, if at any point you have a suggestion, please feel free to reach out. My email is Jakob, Jakob, @myc.team. Lastly, and probably most importantly, we have to game the algorithm. I know that it doesn't seem like a big deal, but the truth is there's a lot of junk out there on the internet. And if we want people to be able to see good information like this that's actually making people's lives better, I need each and every one of you to like, subscribe, share, post on people's walls, and especially word of mouth. Spread the message. All of our socials are at the MYC Study, and the website is themycstudy.com. Tell your friends, tell your coaches, tell your teammates to go ahead and check out the MYC Study. I think that there's a lot of great information and wisdom that these guests have been bringing people, and it's only going to get better because I'm going to continue to grow as a host as well. So all of you that are part of this MYC community, Go forth and master your craft. I'll see you guys next week.